Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Chicanery. We are your hosts. I am Danny, and we have JT.
Hello again.
And so, this is a recap of the Hungarian Grand Prix. Um, there is a remarkable amount that came out of this race, plus kind of a big segment at the end. No spoilers quite yet. So I guess without further ado, we're going to get into silly season. And that's going to be current up to the recording Wednesday, July 31st at about 7:30 Eastern time in the evening. There's so much going that by the time I sit down and do a Belgium episode, out there will probably be more that needs to be tacked on. But with that out of the way, I guess we'll kind of dive right in.
What's going on, everybody? It's your apparently least favorite podcast host. Yeah, I'm a little salty about that poll. Come here to talk to you guys about something real quick. Now, I know I wasn't on this episode, and I know I haven't been on any recent episodes, but I can't help it. I've been crisscrossing the nation, exploring every barbecue joint and subsequently bathroom from Houston all the way to Miami. But, be that as it may, we still have work to do outside of our regular jobs, right? So we're less than a month out from going back to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the oval configuration. So excited about it. What else? What does that have in common with anything else? What are you talking about, Carl? Why are you mentioning this race? Well, that's because our great friends at Home Field Apparel are, of course, based out of Indianapolis. And if you haven't heard me talk about them before, you're in for a treat. Home Field Apparel is a vintage collegiate apparel company. They've done designs for over 80 collegiate programs. They also this year got into making vintage motorsports apparel. They've had some awesome collections: the Hendrick Motorsports, the Indy 500 collection, the Aero McLaren collection. All fantastic shirts, fantastic products. It is blistering hot in at least 50% of the country right now, probably more. And I'm telling you something, there is nothing better to cool you off on a hot day like a quality made home field shirt. Those other places, those shirts are heavy wool. They're made for guys in Siberia. They're gonna you're gonna roast alive one of those things. You get you a nice, cool, crisp home field shirt. Don't shrink in the wash. Don't hold me to that. I don't want us to get sued, but they usually don't shrink in the wash. Great quality at a great price. On top of that, and they're easy to get to. Homefieldapparel.com. They've even got an app. It works wonderful. And then while you're at it, use our code VLV24 for 15% off your first order. Like I said, go and check out the merchandise. They've got some great collections, some great hats. I mean, just everything about them. Mwah, wonderful. Anyway, again, that's code VLV24 at homefieldapparel.com.
And so to start us off, Esteban Ocon goes to Haas. He is being paired along Ollie Behrman for 2025. This was seen as kind of I guess, kind of a lateral move from Alpine, but also kind of a surprising one, given that Ocon was the subject of Bruno Famin's apoplectic rage at Monaco. A lot of folks that thought that might be curtains on Ocon's F1 career, but it just wasn't. But as just simple math tells you, 3 don't fit into 2, and so that means somebody had to go, and the obvious loser here is Kevin Magnussen. This is the second time that he has been dropped by Haas in his career, which I'll need to look that up, but that feels like that might be no, he would be tied with Daniel Kvyat for getting dropped from Red Bull's driver program because he got dropped twice. So I was going to say it's a record, but it's not. So I guess joint tie. I'll need to look that up. I can't think of anybody that's been dropped more than twice by the same general team. So I guess we'll leave that there. But moving on, there is a big personnel shakeup at Audi. So, of course, for those of you who have been heretofore unaware, um, how is that rock that you're living under? I hope it's cozy. Um, Audi is effectively buying up the Sauber F1 team. So originally it was just going to be a 75% stake, and it was going to be a 100% acquisition in 26 or 2027, or full acquisition of that stake. I guess I should clarify, because 75 is not 100, but they increased it to 100, and then that will be fully complete by 2026. Um, but it's worth noting that just laying the groundwork hasn't gone well. Again, if you've been paying even a modicum of attention, you will know that this year's Sauber is dog slow. It sucks in the low speed, it sucks in the high speed. It has completely sapped all of Zhou Guanyu's confidence, and so he has been, on balance, probably the slowest driver in the field this year as a result. Um, but as because of all of this, alarm bells are ringing in Ingolstadt. Um, and so Audi's chief technical officer, Oliver Hoffman, and Sauber CEO, Andreas Seidel, have both been fired. Um, and it's worth noting that they have been replaced by Mattia Bonato, who has re entered the fray. And he will be taking over the chief technical officer role and the chief operating officer role. And it is rumored that Mike Crack is going to join from Aston Martin. And the curious amongst you may be asking why both Hoffman and Seidel got fired. And according to some reports, there was a bit of a power struggle going on. Hoffman, who is meant to only be basically purely advisory to the F1 team, had been taking a much, much, much more active role and had been undermining Seidel, which had initiated something of a back and forth between the two parties. And Audi basically said, okay, both of you can shut up and pack your bags. And so apparently this is something of a statement move from Audi that, certainly discordant work environment is just not going to be tolerated. And that is what we ended up with. Um, but Bonato joining doesn't really seem like the way to go about this. I'd be interested to know what you think, JT.
I have no idea, to be honest. I mean, if I'm judging like based off of like how he's been at Ferrari, I would say that maybe things may not start off pretty smooth for Audi. I mean, maybe, who knows? Maybe it could all go well, and then, what I'm saying won't matter or have any weight, but, that's how I feel personally.
Yeah, it's interesting because I understand why somebody like Bonato has some appeal. Bonato basically worked throughout almost all sectors of Ferrari over the course of nearly 30 years. But Bonato's undoing was the fact that the Formula One team and being team principal, you're talking about a high pressure, very draconian environment. That was what got him ousted from Ferrari. Audi in the Volkswagen group at large, to be perfectly honest, is that just with a German accent, honestly. And so I don't see how Bonato could succeed at Audi where he failed at Ferrari. I don't know. Maybe heading, a few hundred kilometers north, maybe that's the change of scenery required. But I don't see this working out either. Um, but speaking of team principal shakeups, uh, Bruno Famin stepped down as team principal. He will be leaving the post officially at the end of August. So that's going to be right after Zandvoort, I do believe. Was going to be because that'll be basically after the first race back from the summer break. But he will be in charge of other motorsport activities at the Renault Group at Viry-Châtillon. It was just announced today he was replaced by, I do believe his name is Oliver Oakes, if I remember correctly. Let me look that up. Yes, it is. It's Oliver Oaks. We've got lots of Ollies and Olivers here in the news segment, so I needed to check that. Um, but yes, he will be replaced by him, ostensibly after. Um, and this comes all amid increasing rumors that Alpine is going to become a customer team, um, and that they're going to be bailing on their 2026 power unit project. So we talked about it last episode that Flavio Briatore has been brought back in the fold, and he's been dropping nuggets throughout the paddock that Vieri Chatillon is going bye bye. Um, but yeah, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. Carlos Sainz has finally picked a suitor. He is signed with Williams for 2025 and 2026, and beyond, quote unquote, which makes me think 2 years with a 1 year option. Um, So Williams has now got Albon and Sainz as its lineup, and well, unsurprisingly, Logan Sargent is out of here. Quite where he's going to land, we don't know. But that being said, there was some chatter and potentially some leaks in the IndyCar paddock that Sargent may end up there on the IndyCar grid in 2025. We'll see, and well, we'll follow up on that in an IndyCar episode. And most surprisingly of all, Sergio Perez has been given a stay of execution at Red Bull Racing. Um, it is strongly implied internally by Red Bull that he'll be staying on for the rest of the season. However, because of the odd way that the calendar has been formatted this year, we basically have a summer break and then like an autumn break. And so we'll come back from Zandvoort. I can't remember what the fourth and final race is before we adjourn for a bit for the autumn to finish up those last 6 races, I do believe. And so in theory, there will be time to reassess then. But this is just as wild because Helmut Marko publicly called Perez's Belgium Grand Prix performance, quotes, a collapse, which I don't know. That doesn't sound like the kind of person you want to keep in that seat, but we'll talk more about that later. That's foreshadowing, kids. But anyway, moving on to at the track stuff. So quali would be kind of wild. It was like you would have changing conditions. You would have a little wet. The practice sessions were crazy hot. It's like 34, 35 degrees Celsius. So you're looking at high 90 degrees. That's going to be like 95 degrees, 94, 95 degrees thereabouts Fahrenheit for the practice sessions. But yeah, so Daniel Ricciardo would go fastest in Q1 as Perez would crash out of Q1 for the second consecutive round because he did it at Silverstone as well. Mercedes completely goofed and managed to underfuel George Russell. And so that would see him being 1 lap short, and so he wouldn't advance out of Q1. I think he would end up P16 or P17.
I mean,
Um,
Perez crashing in qualifying, I don't know, fork found in kitchen, like,
it's,
happened several times, so
yeah, it's becoming an institution at this point. Is Sergio Perez going to wipe out midway through Q1? It's a sad one because I mean we've talked about it on this show before. I do genuinely like Sergio. It's just his qualifying and race performances, truth be told, most of the time that he's been at Red Bull have just been so stinky. Um, and it makes me wonder if he's just past it, honestly. But Q2 was comparatively quiet. Not really a whole lot went on. But Norris would go the quickest. Lewis would sneak through by 1/1000th of a second, knocking Nico Hulkenberg out. Whereas the other half of Magnussen and then Bottas and both Williams were also knocked out in Q2. Q3, there would be more rain sort of floating around, in the background, which it would rain and sprinkle a bit in spots on the circuit. Sonoda would actually have a gigantic wipeout at exactly the same place that Perez did, funny enough. Um, and Lando would end up going fastest with his teammate Piastri right on his gearbox. And Max Verstappen would round up the top three in qualifying, with Carlos Sainz and then Lewis Hamilton rounding up the top five. Um, but the race is really where things would get kind of interesting. Um, Gasly started from the pits due to a power unit changes to a power unit and just general setup. It was making changes to the car in park fairness conditions, but it was fine because the Alpines were starting at the very back of the grid anyway. So who cares, right? Um, Lando would, interestingly enough, would actually report some throttle pedal issues prior to the race start, um, which they seem to get sorted. It's unclear. Um, but regardless, Norris bottled the start anyway, so again, who cares? Trying to crowd Verstappen, and so Piastri would be ahead by turn one. Um, and it was like multiple cars wide. I think it was technically three wide. I know Lewis was kind of hanging out in the periphery on the start, and so Verstappen ran wide, and he decided the intelligent thing to do was just to gas it off the circuit. Um, And so there ended up being lots of back and forth between him and his race engineer, Jean-Pierre Lambesi, or, GP for short. And, give back the place. And then he was mad, "Oh, so we can drive cars off the track," which is very, very funny coming from Max. Um, but anyway, further back, Stroll and Alonso were creating a little bit of a train. It's like the trolley train, except there were two cars this time. Which prompted Albon and Magnussen to undercut pretty early. And this triggered just a cascade of stops, including Perez and Russell, who were working their way up the order. Um, the leaders would stop a little bit later. Lewis would be the first to effectively try to undercut the leaders. This is on lap 17. Norris and Piastri would follow shortly thereafter, Norris coming in before Piastri, and then Verstappen being the last one to stop. Of that sort of top four on lap 20, which would give Charles the lead until he pit on lap 24. Second stint was fairly uneventful. Piastri would have a slight off. I think that's turn 12. There's a gravel trap out there, or on the exit of 12, rather. And he would lose some time as a result, but he was still controlling the race pretty well, even going so far on the radio to say, quotes, "clean air is king." Which is also a bit of foreshadowing. Gasly will retire on lap 37 with a hydraulics failure, which is just compounding the absolutely horrendous year he's been having. But here's where it starts to get interesting and kind of dicey. So Lando would pit on lap 47 to undercut Verstappen. That is who McLaren said that their race was with, which is not completely accurate, but we'll get to that. However, he inadvertently undercut Piastri as well. With Oscar not being called in for another, I think it was like 3 laps afterwards. Um, of course, the idea was that the running order would be reestablished, um, and would be done so, quote, at Lando's convenience. Verstappen would pit on lap, I think, 48, and would just go bananas on the outlap, which prompted some amusing radio exchanges between him and GP. And he would eventually get around Leclerc, but it wouldn't be until like lap 57 or what have you. But Verstappen was getting desperate. He had been duking it out wheel to wheel with Lewis and was running wide and not really able to find space. And again, grouching about, "Oh, he's moving under brakes, blah, 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 blah." Which again, coming from Max, very funny. Um, But eventually he would go and make an optimistic move. I guess this would have been lap 58, 59, heading into turn one, and just locks up and just, well, if would have sailed past Lewis into the gravel trap if Lewis hadn't already been committed to the corner at that point, and just clatters into the side of the Mercedes before then continuing off the circuit. Um, both cars seemed to escape without significant damage. Um, and again, we've got a let's start a dialogue segment about actually both Red Bull drivers this week. So we'll kind of get into this and we'll break this down a little bit more here in a second. But it was panic stations at McLaren. you know, they, they had completely blown it. They were undercutting, getting Norris to undercut Verstappen, but both Oscar and Lando were like 6 or 7 seconds clear of Verstappen. There was no need to be that proactive. Um, and so it ended up putting Lando like 5 or 6 seconds ahead of Oscar. Um, to be fair, Oscar had made a few mistakes in trying to catch back up, but Lando did not want to give the place back. I mean, it got to the point where Lando's race engineer was practically begging Lando to give the spot back. Think about, remember the Monday morning team meetings. You're going to need Oscar's help to win a championship. And these were calls that were unanswered at best and utterly rebuked at worst, with Norris at one point even saying something like, tell him to speed up. Now, eventually, Norris would heed the call. And on the front straight, heading on to the second to last lap, the penultimate lap, he would give the place back to Oscar. And that is more or less how things would sit. Basically coming to the end with Lewis coming home in third, Charles P4, and it would be Max P5. But now here's where we get into the juicy bits, and I really wanted to kind of structure the episode, kind of backload it with this, because I do genuinely like to talk to you about this. So, question number one, what the hell does Red Bull do about Perez? So, of course, we know Perez has been stinking up the place basically all year. Um, and it's actively costing Red Bull now. Red Bull has a lead of about 42 points over McLaren in the Constructors' Championship, but the peak was, I think, 115 points. But it's worth noting that if McLaren had executed races better, they probably would have passed them by the summer break. And then you have to, all of the drivers that Red Bull has in their driver pool who are all surely better than Sergio. So let's say because I guess Helmut Marko seems to be the one who largely makes the driver decision things. And I'm sorry for doing this to you, but let's say in the scenario, you're Helmut Marko, which sounds miserable, and you have to deal with Sergio Perez or just who is in that second car next to Max. What are you doing?
I mean, I really don't. I mean, first of all, I mean, I feel like maybe get rid of Sergio. Like, I don't really think he's done much to deserve the seat. And honestly, I would argue that a lot of the F1 grid doesn't actually deserve their seat, but that's a different discussion for a different day. So obviously, like, replace him. I mean, that's what I would start. Like, just literally replace him. I mean, they have to have like other people. Like, I don't know. I'm not really that familiar with like the pool of like drivers that's in like the Red Bull stable. But surely there's like, I don't know, some F2 drivers that could deserve a chance. The F2 does fuck all for like drivers trying to get into F1, but I mean, I don't know. Start utilizing those people. I mean, and doesn't I don't know. Red Bull has reserve drivers too. I don't know. Put in a reserve driver for a weekend and see how they do, and then assess from there. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar place to you with that. So, to answer your question, Isaac Hadjar is the F2 driver that's kind of in the Red Bull stable right now. And he's actually on track to win the F2 championship by a considerable margin. As of Spa, I seem to think he's up like 60 points in the driver's standings over the next closest guy. Um, so he would be the F2 driver, but then, you look within F1, you've got Liam Lawson, who is the reserve driver for RB VCarb. You've got Yuki, who is in the seat. You've got, of course, you do have Daniel Ricciardo, and while I think that that is absolutely the wrong thing to do personally,
No.
Dan
No.
exactly, Daniel does not, I don't think, deserves that seat. But the issue is that for whatever reason, they have just been the Red Bull driver pool. I guess somebody somewhere has just decided that Yuki is not getting promoted to the top team, even though I think he is certainly the most proven. Um, Out of this group, because I mean, Liam did, don't get me wrong. I mean, we talked about this when he was subbing in for Daniel in his broken hand last year. He did really, really well for those, 5 races or however many it was. But that's about it. Um, I do think Yuki is the best one to go in this place, or go in that seat. But Liam Lawson is certainly not a bad shout either. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I could just not be knowing what I'm talking about, but I don't know, like, if Yuki is necessarily the best driver to put in that spot because, like, well, I mean, part of me, like, I can't actually gauge, like, how well, like, Yuki's actually doing, considering the fact that Ricardo is, like, not that great, and because he's not that great, obviously the bar is, like, pretty low, like, it's pretty easily you can easily clear that bar with Ricardo being his teammate. So like I don't know. I'm not saying like do I think he's bad? No. But like how is he like talented enough for like the proper Red Bull instead of, basically junior Red Bull? I don't know. I mean, I would probably go with Liam Lawson or the other guy, how do you I don't know how you say his name.
Isaac Hadjar.
Hajar. But I'm like, I mean, sure, there's the risk that, well, they may not be that great. Okay, fine. Sure, that's a possibility. However, they're going to be rookie drivers, and you probably would expect them to make, the standard typical errors that rookie drivers might make. But I mean, to be honest, I feel like they can't be any worse than Perez at this point.
And to be fair, it's funny you bring that up about Yuki, and you do actually have a point. Yuki does occasionally have a habit of driving down to his teammate. We saw him do this with Gasly periodically, and he did it a lot when De Vries was in the car last year. Um, and I know that last year's AlphaTauri was the early versions were kind of difficult to deal with at times. That was not a good car. That wasn't a good car at all. But but yeah, so that's you're absolutely right. And maybe that's um why Red Bull is hesitant to promote him is because frankly his teammates haven't really been all that good, barring Gasly and Ricardo, uh, sometimes, but never really consistently.
No, Gasly and Ricardo are they're good when they want to be good, which, could be any race weekend. It's when they feel like it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's kind of been they tend to blow very hot and cold, I guess is probably the best way to sum them up. But but all of this is words to say if certainly you haven't been paying attention, is that there are lots of better options than Perez, and I don't understand why he keeps getting extension after extension, time after time.
I mean,
It's like
somebody brought up on the timeline, I think might have been like yesterday or today, but like I remember they were talking about how like a lot of like F1 teams are just like they're very like hesitant to like actually like make use of like I guess like younger drivers or like actually like I don't know, like want to like bring them into the team. And then they kind of just like sit around and not really do much. And like, I guess like they were kind of saying they don't really take risks, which is like technically a lot of these F1 teams, I feel like they can afford to take the risk. And it's like, I mean, I don't know how else like you're supposed to like grow and develop as like a team if you're not going to do that. Um, like I don't know. And that's probably why, like, because again, I mean, Red Bull is really not benefiting from keeping Perez around and giving him extensions after extension after extension, like you said. They are better off taking their chances, taking like literally sacking him and at the end of the season and taking their chances with somebody else. I mean, again, he can't like they can't be any worse than he is, and I kind of think that that's probably why this keeps happening or why we're in this situation anyways, why we're even talking about this.
Yeah, agreed. And and you say that, certainly, he's can't they can't really be doing any worse, or that, certainly Perez isn't helping. I would argue that Perez is actually the point where he is hurting this team. The Red Bull RB20 is not the fastest car on the grid anymore. It was one thing when, Verstappen was, 4 seconds clear. So, that meant Perez would be about a second clear, basically. And it wasn't that big a deal. And Max could basically carry Red Bull for when Sergio had his, basically his annual mid-season slump. Um, but Max can't do that. We talked about it with the Silverstone episode. Mercedes, McLaren, and Red Bull are all kind of so close right now that trying to play the percentage game is genuinely impossible because it varies so much. It's so circuit dependent that the percentages. I mean, we're talking thousandths, 10 thousandths of a percent difference at this point. Um, and again, and this is averaging out quali and race pace any given weekend. Um, and that makes it tough to sort of suss that out. The point being is that the McLaren is probably the best overall car. Uh, Mercedes is kind of figuring out how to like strategy again. So if McLaren borks it somehow, Mercedes is going to be there. And then the Red Bull maybe has the ultimate peak performance, but it seems like it's really, really difficult to harness, even for Max. And so there having to be some compromises in the setup to not have the car just basically be an undrivable mess.
I
And
mean, I think McLaren's problem is still that they are used to being a midfield team. Like they are like a team that is now competing for like championships now, and they are still acting like they are a midfield team when they are not a midfield team anymore. And they have yet to, I guess, get out of that mindset and stop behaving like a midfield team. I don't know.
I
Because
think
honestly,
I think
like
you're
there's
onto
a lot of
something.
times where I feel like McLaren is not necessarily like I mean, we already talked about this in the Silverstone episode, to be honest. How it's like they will mess up strategies, but like when they mess up strategies, it doesn't really cost them that much. Like they can mess up a strategy and, they might finish like third or fourth. I mean, at worst, they're still like in the top five, or like at worst, like probably they're still going to be in the top 10 somewhere. Like it's not like super damaging to the point where, they're like 15th or 16th, they botch something completely badly. So like they I mean, they have yet to like I don't know. I really don't know how you describe it, but I'm just like because they don't actually like nothing is actually like severely like wrong. Like nothing has gone like catastrophically wrong when they do mess up strategies, like such as just 2 weekends ago, like at the Hungarian GP, which I thought was pretty disastrous. And I feel like the best case scenario that came out of this disastrous strategy was that they had cars finish like on the podium, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, and you're absolutely right, and that's the big thing, especially with this race. McLaren got the 1-2, but it was a whole big team orders kerfuffle because, they're trying to cover off Max, and Max wasn't anywhere in the picture. You did not need to undercut Lando that aggressively, where this is not a midfield scrap where, one difference lap, being out, that makes the difference between, 10th or 14th. It's like you did not need to try to do that, and then that was really what caused that. But, yeah, you're absolutely right, and, like JT said, certainly if you haven't already listened, listen to the Silverstone episode because we talk about McLaren and their failure of race execution and why that might be. So I think that was kind of a fun discussion, and it's something worth having a listen to if you haven't already.
I mean, because they have pretty poor race execution, like time after time. Like it's kind of like a thing with them.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, no, and like I said, and certainly to circle back to Perez, yeah, keeping him is a bad idea because if I think keeping him is going to cost them the constructors title. I think Max is too far gone to be caught for the driver's title. Again, given that his closest rival is ostensibly Verstappen and McLaren can't quite figure it out. Um, but But yeah, and it's just like I said, they've got such this log jam of drivers and different ones that they can pull from, and they're just choosing not to, which feels very deliberately obtuse to me personally. I don't get it. Um, you know, it's like, I tweeted it. Oh gosh, was it after Perez crashed out of Q1 at Montreal? I think it was, but that, we watched Albon and Gasly, who frankly I thought, even despite being, younger and arguably being in a much worse Red Bull, were doing a better job week in and week out. And we saw both of them get replaced mid-year. In fact, actually, Albon was the one who replaced Gasly, if I remember correctly. Um, so it blows my mind. I don't remember who replaced Albon, but at any rate, it just blows my mind that, they were willing to basically sack drivers, at will. But then, now that Perez gets in the seat, it's like he's practically glued his ass to it. I don't understand how we've gone from, basically ruining perfectly good, or almost ruining perfectly good young driver careers to, yes, let's keep this idiot in the car basically until the heat death of the earth when we have obviously better drivers floating around. It boggles my mind.
I mean,
But
I don't know.
yeah, it's wild. But at any rate, moving on to the other Red Bull driver, uh, is Crash Stappen back? Um, or I guess perhaps the less pithy question there. What exactly do we make of the evolution or lack thereof of Max's racecraft, or again, lack of, depending on sort of what side of the fence that you sit on. Of course, Verstappen had that very aggressive, very clumsy move that he tried to make on Hamilton and T1 in sort of the dying breaths of the Hungarian Grand Prix. And that sort of marked kind of the nadir of his frustrations with the team. Um, And car performance, I mean, you had people on social media, calling it, quotes, head loss, which I had actually never heard that phrase before seeing it on socials, but I actually quite like it. And I think it's very accurate to describe how Max was behaving throughout the
I
Grand
can't believe
Prix.
you've never heard that.
No, I
People
had
use it all the time.
never heard of it ever before prior to that. But yeah, it's a curious thing. And Max's racecraft has been called into question before with prior incidents. The collision with Lando at Austria for moving under braking. Lando was all over the back of him, and Lando finally goes to try to shove it on basically the outside, and Max just turns into him. And then never mind kind of some of the high profile incidents during the 2021 title fight, Silverstone and Monza specifically. Those are the first two that come to mind where, well, frankly, Verstappen got punted by Lewis both times for it. Um, but this is really the first that we've seen of it back. So just what do we make of this?
I mean, Max Verstappen, like, to be honest, like, to me, comes off across as, like, a driver that, like, his racecraft is, like, very inconsistent. Like, there are a lot of drivers where it's like, regardless of discipline, I mean, it might because, like, I see how they race, and I'm like, when they're, like, making passes and stuff like that, I can expect, like, what I'm gonna see them do. Like, are they the type that they're going to, be play fair and, not necessarily, like, be super aggressive, or are they the type to play bumper cars when they're passing somebody, or whatever the case may be. But a lot of times, like Verstappen, like I can't like tell like what exactly he's gonna do. Like, so I feel like his racecraft is like very inconsistent. Like sometimes it's good when he wants it to be good, and obviously it's bad when it's bad. And honestly, I don't know. I mean, Crash Stappen is a very funny, fonder name, I guess, but I don't know. And then, like, I don't know, his like head loss on the radio was, I mean, it was kind of funny, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, he should be like more respectful to like his team." And I'm like, to be honest, like I don't really care that much about drivers like having head loss over like communications, or being crashing out over communications, because that happens like pretty frequently. Like in my opinion, I'm like, as long as they're not saying like slurs or whatever, I'm like, they can say whatever. Like, I don't really care. Plus, like, the communication is mainly supposed to be between the driver and the teams, not necessarily used to like sensationalize, or, you know, not really for like, I don't know, the public per se. So, like, it doesn't really matter that much to me. I mean, other people might feel differently, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, and especially when you start talking about like Max and GP, absolutely. Because I mean, GP can serve it up with the best of them all. Um, he does not take any stick from Max. And actually, you heard on the radio after the collision, Max was like, "Oh, he moved under braking and he just turned into me." And GP was like, "Shut up!" It's like, just shut up. Um, and you really need to do that with Max sometimes. Kind of, I say, grab him by the scruff, metaphorically, of course. Um, and just tell him to pipe down. Um, but yeah, no, this just yeah, it's interesting. And it's one of those things where it really begged the question that, a lot of people thought, after, 2021 and maybe there was some maturing that had happened and, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, having a just rocket ship of a car helps too. But that, certainly Crash Stappen had been, put out to pasture. But it really does just seem like so it only seems like Max kind of calms down at the wheel when he has a car advantage. And I mean, to be fair, like some of that is understandable. I mean, you're not going to be going hell for leather every lap. If you've got the fastest car by a country mile, that's just silly. That's a great way to make an unforced error. So I'm not necessarily saying I'm mad at him for that because that's dumb, frankly. But um But yeah, it's just yeah, definitely it seems like he calms down, like I said, when there's a massive, massive car performance, and now that Max is kind of fighting for his life a little bit, um, it seems like we're regressing a bit in like, some of those, low percentage moves that are, never likely to work. He's going for and, just driving very, very desperately. I guess is probably the best way I can think to phrase it. Um, and I think it's a real dark spot on what is otherwise, a pretty fabulous, sort of accruement of accolades. And, just genuinely somebody who I do think when it's all said and done will probably be looked at as one of the greats in the sport. Um, but, trying to dive bomb people from, 50, 60 meters back under brakes and, again, turning in on people like in the braking zone is just it feels unnecessary. And also it also begs the question is, is this not a case of, quotes, is Crash Stappen back, but rather did Crash Stappen never leave us? Which I don't quite know where you land on that scale personally, but I start to wonder more and more if maybe it's the latter.
The commentators were like attributing his head loss, whatever you want to call it, to the fact that he like stayed up late the previous night competing in like the virtual 24 hours of spa. And I'm like, I really don't know if that has anything to do with anything, but whatever.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if they were like actually if that was meant to be like a just a really really bad pithy joke. I wasn't quite sure what to make of that from Crofty. I personally didn't like it because, like you said, it's just like okay, I don't really think that has. I don't think that has anything to do with anything here, but sure. I mean, for what it's worth, apparently some internal communications came out that they have banned him from taking part in any sim racing events that take place on race weekends. So,
I mean, yeah, I heard that, but I'm like, I don't know how they're gonna stop him from doing that. I mean, he is like he's a grown adult, like he's not a child, so like I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, he can kind of do whatever he wants. So I don't really know how they're gonna enforce that, unless
yeah,
they're
I
gonna
don't know.
have Red Bull personnel logged on, like online, constantly checking and see if he's like, if it's like 1 a.m. and seeing if his Discord status says online and playing X, Y, and Z game or something.
Yeah, see, I had a funnier one that they would have somebody, just like somebody actually physically in his motorhome the night before races. Um, but yeah, no, I don't really know how they plan on enforcing that unless they're going to try and do it on a good faith-based system, which I don't know if Max would necessarily adhere to that anyway. Um, but yeah, it is. It's all very silly. You know, I guess to kind of round out this discussion, I for one I don't think his racecraft has really taken the evolutionary step that everybody thinks it is. He thinks it has. Sorry. I just think he's had a rocket ship of a car the last few years, and so that's masking or has masked a lot of it. In a lot of ways, it's funny. It reminds me of Michael Schumacher because Michael used to do a lot of the same stuff when he didn't just have an outright car performance. Adelaide 95, 94, 95. When he basically crashed into Damon Hill to take him out to win the championship. And then Jerez 97, I do believe. And it was the same thing. He just turned into the side of Jacques Villeneuve, again, to try to disable his car and win the championship that year. Except that year it didn't work. Um, so, yeah, it reminds me a lot of that. And it's the same thing. Michael has an otherwise, well, at least until Lewis came along, what felt like an unparalleled, unbeatable, hell, an unmatchable sort of, racing record. But that has always felt sort of like dark spots, dark clouds over his career, which was basically when he got desperate. He started just doing just wild shit. And this feels very this feels very similar, if I'm being perfectly honest. Um, heck, you can even if you wanna throw it back, um, like Senna, Prost, Suzuka, I guess 89 and 90, same thing. Now admittedly, that some of that was Senna trying to make a bit of a point. I don't necessarily think he did that in the correct manner either. Whole thing about dirty side of the track for pole versus not, so on and so forth. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where you have a guy with a whole bunch of ability and talent who's just doing dumb stuff to try and win races, and I don't think it's particularly flattering if I'm being perfectly honest. So I guess on that note, we will leave it there for Hungary this year. Um, Certainly, like I said, I will probably, well, almost certainly, before we get to Zandvoort, I'll do a quickie, mini-sode for Belgium. That'll probably be mostly talk about what in the French toast went wrong with George Russell and, how that car was underweight because, like I said, there really wasn't a whole lot to report on with that race. Um, and then after that, Formula One, we adjourn until Zandvoort, which is August, I think Grand Prix is August 25th. So, on that note, we have been your hosts, Danny and JT, and this has been another episode of Chicanery. Until next time, everybody.